at-risk kids who are at-risk offline are also at risk online. And it's not the stranger danger fears. The conversation has really evolved to what type of information kids are putting out about themselves, what type of information kids are putting out about other kids. It's the online harassment, the insults, the sexting, the cyberbullying. And so we were really thrilled, in some ways, if that's the right word, to see that there was some actual research that was being done in this arena, because what we were seeing in the last couple of years is a lot of states jump to sort of a one-approach-fits-all policy, especially when it comes to cyberbullying. If you look back in the last couple of years, 2008, there were only a dozen states that had some sort of cyberbullying law on the books, just 2 years ago. If you look today, almost every state has some law on the books. And while schools are wanting to address these issues, they recognize that cyberbullying is a true threat to some kids, and they want to address them. You know, when you've got state lawmakers telling schools, we want you to do something, and this is what we want you to do, no matter what your situation is, then we run into a real problem. And from my organization, you know, it's really been sort of an interesting debate to become involved in, because we are a group that fights for tougher penalties for sexual predators. When an adult is preying on a kid, we expect some serious consequences to take place. But when we look at issues like cyberbullying, this isn't the same type of criminal penalties that should be put into place. We're talking about young girls who are 14 to 17 primarily, who are insulting one another. It's the Mean Girls viral, right? I mean, it's such a great movie, you know, who knew that Tina Fey would have so many accolades all these years later in that particular role. And so, you know, we started looking at what are the states doing. We attend a lot of conferences. We work in the states. We work to train lawmakers and law enforcement on what's going on in our schools and the communication that kids are having. And we find, not surprisingly, although it's definitely surprising to this group, that a lot of lawmakers don't understand the technology. They don't understand what kids are actually doing online, what they're using the technology for. And so they're jumping into these laws. You know, I was reviewing some of the laws in the 44 states that now have a cyberbullying policy. And for the most part, you know, some of them say, oh, a school needs a policy to address cyberbullying. Oh, okay, great. I mean, we have bullying just like we had it on the playground in the offline world. You know, we address that when necessary. And of course, those same types of standards and expectations should apply online. But then you start looking, and you get into Vermont, for instance. Jennifer and I were having this conversation before our panel started, and Vermont has imposed a $500 fine for anyone caught cyberbullying. Well, you know, what are you supposed to do with that? What does that mean? You know, so some 14-year-old girl's parents had to pay a $500 fee to the school because her daughter was saying something mean about someone else. When we are talking about online harassment, when we are talking about some sort of predation, even if it is by a child, and when there are serious criminal consequences, and there are the stories where you've got these some of these young kids committing suicide, or they're afraid to go to school, they're intimidated to get onto a school bus. Those are serious issues, and they need to be addressed with seriously. But for the most part, we're talking about kids who are mean to one another online, and charging their parents $500 because they insulted someone just doesn't seem to really move the debate forward. Louisiana has a pending law right now, a pending legislation, that they're looking at making first-time offense of cyberbullying a misdemeanor. In theory, the intent, probably it's good. You know, they're looking at it saying, oh, we've got these terrible cases, and our kids are fearful, and they can't come to school, and they're depressed, and their entire social world is changing, and we need to do something about it. That intent is good, but criminalizing a 14-year-old for saying something mean probably isn't the best approach. We need to really look at education, and when you look at these reports, that's what came out of it, and that's what's so promising to see. You know, it probably gets tiring to hear education, 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 but it is so true, and it's parents, and it's school teachers, and it's after-school programs, it's kids themselves talking about these issues, trying to figure out what's really going on in their life, what's going on in their online world, and teaching them to become better digital citizens. And you can't legislate social norms. We get a lot of pushback from the schools who say, okay, well, we have this cyberbullying policy in effect. We don't know how to enforce it. We don't really know what enforcement means. We have no idea. Once the child has been either bullied or doing the bullying themselves, what happens to that kid? Are they suspended? Are they expelled? When they come back to school, then what happens? And there are a lot of questions that are still sort of out there. We're looking, I'm involved with another organization called the Safe Internet Alliance, and we're looking at trying to provide some research, working with teachers to try to answer some of those questions so that we can look at what should be best practices for cyberbullying. But for now, we know that education is key, and we know that it has to start at home. A lot of schools are complaining, saying, you're asking us to look at free speech issues. You're asking us to look at cyberbullying when most cyberbullying instances, of course, don't happen at school. If you're talking about a computer or a cell phone, it's happening at home. It's happening on a weekend after school hours. And so you're asking schools to step in, and a lot of schools are saying, look, we just can't do this. We don't have the authority. We may not want to have the authority. There's a difference when, in some instances, a kid calls into the school and has a bomb threat. Calls in a bomb threat. The school has to be able to take that threat seriously, and they have to have procedures in place because they need to protect the kids who are in the school or who are on their way to coming to school and make sure that they're having a safe environment in which to be educated. The same applies for cyberbullying. So there are those instances where the school needs to be involved. But we're saying, look, lawmakers, we need to sort of take a step back and review these policies before we start throwing our 14-year-old girls in jail for something that happens on the playground every day. Pew has some really terrific research out there, and they interviewed a bunch of teenagers. And yes, we know that about 30% or so, depends on what study you look at, that they have received some sort of insult online. Now, some don't care, some walk away, it doesn't matter, some take that very much to heart. But most teenagers still say that the majority of bullying still happens on the playground or at recess or in person. And so we just want to make sure that lawmakers are taking a step back and not having a sort of one-size-fits-all approach, and that we are able to work in the schools and work at home to educate parents and teens about being digital citizens. And at this point, Mike, I just have to ask you, what's the best way to prevent cyberbullying?
We know the answer. Don't be a teenage girl.
Exactly. I mean, we really are talking about teenage girls here, and so we need to keep this in perspective, and of course take it seriously when a line is crossed and when it does turn into online harassment or any kind of intimidation.
We're going to give teenage girls equal time.
Yes.
Anyone who's close to being a teenage girl in the room, you'll have your chance.
But education really is key, and that's what we would like to see, and what we're involved in at the state and local level, and trying to make a realistic best approach and take these types of reports and the findings out to the communities to say, hey, the internet can be dangerous, and there are instances when we need to really make sure we're protecting our kids, but for the most part, kids are good kids, and when they're good offline, they're good online, and technology is okay. We want to get parents to be comfortable with saying yes to technology and allowing their kids and their teens to use it and use it safely.
Stacie, thanks very much. I want to turn